You've heard of the 4th of July, but you may not be as familiar with April 29th. Well, what happened on that day back in 1607 predated the Founding Fathers. It even predated the landing of the Mayflower. And it seeded the ground to let this country grow into the greatest Christian nation the world had ever seen.
We'll tell you just what happened on this day more than 400 years ago. But first in the news, Justice Anthony Kennedy is expected to be the pivotal swing vote in the landmark same-sex marriage cases at the Supreme Court. That ruling could impose gay marriage on the country or leave it up to the states. Paul Strand brings us the story.
Whenever the justices hear a case dealing with same-sex marriage, partisans on both sides fill the Supreme Court plaza with signs and colorful costumes and lots of yelling at each other.
Jesus loved the sinners, and we're loving you just like Jesus loved the Pharisees. We're telling you to turn. God will not hear your prayers. God does not hear the prayers of the wicked.
You see Orthodox Jews condemning homosexual activity, while pro-gay Jews protest against the Orthodox Jews with signs and songs. All of this effort in the hope of pushing the Supreme Court one way or the other as it mulls these 4 cases rolled into one that could decide whether same-sex marriage is imposed on the entire nation.
What's interesting is whether any of these demonstrators outside or even the lawyers inside will have any effect on the justices. Some analysts say that already 4 on each side of the argument have made up their minds, leaving Anthony Kennedy once again as a swing vote to decide this crucial question: should all 50 states have to recognize same-sex marriage?
The attorney who argued on behalf of the states thinks Kennedy might be leaning towards letting the states and the people decide rather than the justices.
And he said this is the marriage definition that we've had for millennia. How are we in a position that we can decide better than everybody else in the history of the world?
But the attorney leading the charges for national gay marriage said to the justices if they rule against it,
you are constitutionalizing a second-class status for gay and lesbian people. You are endorsing that the families are deficient and inferior.
This lesbian couple contends the nation's ready for gay marriage, except for a misguided few.
People not really understanding that we're just like everybody else because someone somewhere had taught them something different.
And it's hard to feel bad when you know you're right.
But a leading Southern Baptist Convention official disagrees.
The states have spoken on this, and when the people have spoken, they've said they believe that only marriage is a union between a man and a woman.
And Barrett Duke says God sees it that way too.
God defined marriage as a union of one man and one woman. Regardless of what humans decide to do about that, it doesn't change what marriage really is, and the Supreme Court should leave the definition that God has given us alone.
This rabbi warns if the government forces gay marriage on the whole country, it will be an official rebellion against God.
We plead with our government leaders, we plead with our judges, we plead with our fellow people. Let's remember there's a God on the universe. Let's remember there's one ruling us all. Let's remember there is one giving us air to breathe and keeping us alive.
Former lesbian, now pro-life activist Lauren Handy says nationwide government-backed gay marriage will in its way hurt America as much as the court legalizing abortion.
1973 legalized abortion, 1/3 of my generation gone, and so if the court decides in their favor, it's going to be just like that.
That's the kind of hot and heavy emotion same-sex marriage brings out on the Supreme Court plaza.
But inside the court, it's all about the argument. Should the states have the right to decide this, or should the court say all 50 states must recognize gay marriage from this point on? Decision probably comes out in late June. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Supreme Court.
Well, thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, back in '73, the court ruled in Roe versus Wade that there was a constitutional right to terminate a life. And that was not vetted by the states. It was not voted on by the people. It was decided by a narrow majority on the court using very, very questionable science, which has been proven to be totally erroneous in subsequent years. But that thing has left the country in chaos for all the years subsequent. And the same thing would be the case. The Supreme Court should not interfere with something like this. They ought to just leave it to the states, leave it to whoever, but not make it some kind of a national thing. Once it is enshrined in the Constitution, there's nothing people can do about it. As long as it's up to the people, you can vote it in or vote it out. But the Supreme Court, what can you do? What can you do with Roe versus Wade? I mean, they come up and say, well, it's constitutional. Well, why? It's nothing in the Constitution having to do with gay marriage. The Founding Fathers would be horrified if they thought we were talking about adding that to the Constitution that they had drafted. There's nothing in our history that in any way, shape, or form gives credence to the thought that we should have same-sex marriage. It's just not in our history. Well, anyhow, we'll see what happens. But remember, chances are they voted yesterday. They won't announce the decision. They voted, and then they'll decide who writes the decision, who's got the dissents, and so forth. But Chief Justice Roberts will decide who writes the decision. And I just don't know what Kennedy would do, but it seems like to me he would come down on the side of the states on this one. Well, in other news, the curfew has restored calm to Baltimore. But that's only temporary. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. Baltimore now faces the huge task of rebuilding after all the damage from Monday night's massive riots. Ephraim Graham brings us the story.
Go home. Is that too hard to do?
Baltimore residents locked arms to join forces with more than 1,000 police officers and 2,000 National Guardsmen to enact the first night of the city's 10 o'clock curfew. Some defiant demonstrators refused to leave, but that resistance lasted only about 30 minutes until officers fired flashbangs and tossed smoke canisters.
I think the biggest thing is that citizens are safe, the city is stable. We hope to maintain it that way.
Tuesday night was a far cry from Monday when rioters torched cars, tossed debris at police, and tore apart businesses. Officers only arrested 10 people Tuesday, compared to more than 400 Monday. This is an image many Baltimore residents and church leaders spent their Tuesday trying to erase. They joined together and hit the streets to clean.
Because we are frustrated. We just need to find a better way to deal with it.
In the midst of Monday's chaos, this frustrated Baltimore mother was hailed a hero when Toya Graham spotted her teenage son on live television throwing rocks at police. The single mom marched down the street and fought to drag him home, giving him a severe talking to on the way. She told reporters she didn't want to see her son lost to violence or police brutality like Freddie Gray, the young man whose death in police custody first sparked the protest only a week ago. President Obama spoke out, calling the rioters criminals and thugs, but he also pointed out that Baltimore's problems are much older and deeper than the one death.
This has been going on for a long time. This is not new, and we shouldn't pretend that it's new.
Repairing relations between people and police is going to take time in this city. They now also have to find ways to rebuild businesses.
It breaks my heart because those of us who are from Baltimore know how hard we fought for those resources and those stores.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Thanks, Ephraim. Pat, heartbreaking scenes out of Baltimore.
Well, it is, but the mayor, let's face it, she brought it on. What she had to say in those earlier remarks was kind of like an invitation to this stuff. It would have been the easiest thing in the world. And I know it sounds brutal, but if the police had been called in, they were told to stand aside. If they had asked the governor for the National Guard, he would have sent it in. They'd have had troops in there right off the bat, but instead of that, the mayor said, oh, well, let's just let the guys just vent a little bit. Well, you can't let them vent. And who got hurt? Black people. The black business owners and the black residents were the ones that were hurt. They weren't the ones that were engaged in any police brutality, but they're the ones that suffered. And who knows how many teenagers came in. It was just a big lark. They were having just a big party, and they were doing it at the expense of CBS and other businesses. What do you do to stop them? Well, you have tear gas. Tear gas is not lethal. It will not injure them permanently, but it sure will make them uncomfortable. And they come charging in, and they get met by a wall of tear gas, and they will be choking and gasping and going home. The other thing the police can do is use rubber bullets and shoot non-lethal shots. But there needs to be something that says to those people, you don't do this, and we're going to stop it. But if the police had been there and the National Guard had been there, it wouldn't have happened. But the mayor didn't want that. And so it took a whole night of rioting and destruction, who knows how many millions of dollars. But what has it done to the reputation of Baltimore? What business would want to start in Baltimore? They've been trying and trying and trying to build some kind of an economic base, and then all of a sudden these kids go wild. They've got to be controlled. Don't tell me there's anger building up over a period of time. Well, there are ways of settling this. You settle it at the ballot box, and then you settle it in the courts. And you can bring charges against police that are out of control, if they were. There certainly seems to be police brutality in that person whose spine was injured in police custody. But nevertheless, they've got to be taught, and the police have got to be taught. But you vote those guys out, and you bring lawsuits against them. But you don't go tear down buildings and set the city on fire and then throw rocks at the police. And the police have an absolute right to defend themselves so that they can protect the citizens. And if you give them tear gas, yeah, they use smoke grenades. Well, smoke is okay, but I think tear gas is a whole lot better.
You know, Pat,
what?
Rudy Giuliani in New York, he didn't allow rioters in his city when he was mayor. He said he's put a squash on that right away.
Well, he had computers, and the computers identified where the highest crime areas were, and so he mobilized the police into that area, and they just focused in, and they said, we're not going to let these thugs take over. We're not going to let this part of our city be a haven of crime. And they began to bang on those people, and they arrested them, and they put them down. And before long, the city was revitalized, and it was a tremendous thing. The property values were up, and everybody was happy. John.
Pat, Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton says the Baltimore riots show the need to restore order and security. And she says we need to find ways to reform the criminal justice system, like changing some of the sentences for lesser crimes. In a speech today, Clinton is laying out her plans to address those problems. She says there should be reforms for probation, increased support for mental health and drug treatment. And she says there have to be alternative legal penalties for low-level offenders, including young people. Pat?
Well, she's singing off our playbook. We've been talking about that for a long time. When we talk about the nation of criminals, there are more people incarcerated per capita in the United States than any other nation on the face of the earth, including mainland China, communist China, and Russia. We have gotten these crazy laws, and we talk about being tough on crime, and we have mandatory minimum sentences. It's just insane. Somebody is caught with a few ounces of marijuana or cocaine or whatever and winds up with 10 years in prison. The whole thing is crazy, and it needs to be reformed from top to bottom. And many of these criminal penalties, especially those that have been put in place by federal agencies that don't have congressional stamp on them, those need to be just canceled by an executive order, and it needs to be done quickly. We are spending billions and billions of dollars on prisons, on incarcerating of people, and what is the human toll on young people, on families, because of what we do in relation to criminal justice? It is a disgrace. John?
Pat, the death toll from Saturday's earthquake in Nepal has passed 5,000, and it injured more than 10,000, while leaving thousands more homeless. As Gary Lane reports from Kathmandu, the survivors desperately need help.
The aftershocks from Saturday's earthquake have lessened. Tremors are less frequent and milder now. Still, many people remain outdoors, living under tarps and tents, fearing that another big quake may come and destroy their homes. This man told us he's afraid a volcano may erupt. Living without food, electricity, and water, another man complained about the lack of response from his government.
There is no one can help for us, for nothing.
Some stores and businesses are beginning to reopen here, but many people are choosing to leave town. Here in Kathmandu, a line not just blocks long, but miles long. Thousands of people, not hundreds, waiting to get on buses here to get out of town. They say they want to get out of Kathmandu and back to their villages as soon as possible. This man said he's returning to his village because of poor conditions in Kathmandu. Others are leaving to check to see if their family members are okay. As the death toll climbs, thousands of grieving Nepalis attend cremation ceremonies like these at Patsupinath, the largest Hindu temple in the country. Pockets of destruction can be seen throughout the city, and recovery teams from around the world have come to lend a helping hand. But the greatest need for recovery and relief is outside Kathmandu, in remote mountain villages. Many are difficult to reach, and because many of the homes in the rural areas are made from stone and mud, the death toll is expected to worsen. CBN News met up with this woman in Sakuna, a village about a 3-hour drive from the Nepal capital. She lives alone with 2 children. The earthquake destroyed her home and possessions. She says, "There's a lot of pain in my heart. I'm not able to speak. I'm not able to think of what we're going to do." After assessing Sunita's needs, CBN Disaster Relief pledged to return to bring her and other villagers the help they need to endure the upcoming monsoon season and to begin rebuilding their lives. Sunita says she just wants people to help her. Gary Lane, CBN News, Kathmandu, Nepal.
Thanks, Gary. And Pat, for those who want to get involved, it's really easy to offer help.
Well, here's what some of the things that they need right now. They need tarps, tents, blankets, and foam pads for sleeping, so they'll be able to survive the cold that is coming up. We provide water, bleach, soap, hygiene samples, and toiletries. And we also have medical supplies, which we make available to them. So that's CBN Disaster Relief, CBN International, and you can participate just by calling in and saying, or writing in, saying, please use this for this disaster relief, and we'll use all of it, Lord willing, for that purpose. CBN International Disaster Relief Fund is a terrible tragedy formed by the fact that the earth we stand on is moving. The tectonic plates are moving, and those plates are jamming. It's amazing when you think that India used to be part of Africa, and it's floating up, and it hit the Eurasian landmass and jammed up against it. And they did a subduction, as I understand it, that pushed up those mountains, the Himalayas, and so people have tried to climb Mount Everest, and now that's getting to be very difficult, and people have lost their lives there, a number of those very brave Sherpas. So it's a terrible tragedy, but it just happens because this earth we are on is moving.
Yeah, I mean, you think about people that were getting ready to try to climb Mount Everest, and then the avalanche came, and I mean, there's so much heartbreak right now.
They had ladders there, and the ladders are down, the ropes are down, all the climbing equipment. We've made Everest much more easy than some of the other mountains like
Yeah, well,
K2.
I'm so glad that CBN is there, Operation Blessing, because like you said, I mean, it's getting cold. It's starting to get cold. You could tell people look like, you know, not a warm temp climate.